Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Secretariat of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar on the topic of driving greener food and drink choices, as we will be looking at specifically how we can best unlock the great potential of the European Commission's proposal on substantiating green claims. Therefore, just before we kick off today's event, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Member of the European Parliament, Mr. Frank Bogovic, for hosting this event under the umbrella of the European Parliament Intergroup. And prior to passing the floor to Mr. Bogovic for his opening remarks, I would just like to provide you with some housekeeping rules. As we want to have a discussion as interactive as possible, I would like to invite our audience to send us your questions during the event. For that, you can use the Q&As box of the platform that appears at the right-hand side of your screen. In doing so, please note to choose the All Panelists option. And within your question, please make sure to also note the speaker to whom your question would be then best addressed, so that on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. Once again, thank you all for joining us today. And without further ado, I would like to provide the floor to Mr. Bogovic, a member of the European Parliament for Slovenia for the group of EPP since 2014, the chair of the Bioeconomy Working Group under the umbrella of the Intergroup, where Mr. Bogovic also serves as overall vice chair. So on this note, Mr. Bogovic, I'm delighted to have you with us today, and the floor is yours for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Ilias. Dear panelists, dear colleagues, dear participants. I'm delighted to welcome you on today's webinar, Driving Greener Food and Drink Choices, unlocking the potential of the European Commission's proposal on sustainable green claims, organized together with Food Drink Europe and our intergroup on climate change, biodiversity and sustainable development. The development of an EU harmonized legislative framework on green claims, which should set minimum requirements for the voluntary provisions of products, environmental information, has been announced in the 2020 Circular Economy Action Plan. The European Green Deal, particularly the Farm to Fork strategy, has additionally highlighted the importance of harmonization of voluntary green claims and the creation of a sustainable labeling framework that would cover the nutritional, climate, environmental, and social aspects of food products. Currently, both the consumers and companies have very big difficulties in understanding the vast amount of environmental labels and initiatives on the environmental performance of products and companies. In the EU, there are over 200 active environmental labels, beside more than 80 reporting initiatives and methods of carbon emissions. The quality of these labels and initiatives is extremely diverse, partly unreliable, and thus hardly understandable. Therefore, harmonization and the introduction of the standard methodology known as product environmental footprint is therefore more than necessary in order to enhance the sustainability of products, of production and consumption. Consumers are getting more aware of the environmental impacts of the products they consume or use, and the demand of purchase green products is growing very fast. All initiatives from the framework of sustainable green claims should therefore aim to a reliable, comparable and verifiable policy framework across the EU. This would allow all stakeholders, the market actors, to take greener decisions and encourage sustainable production and consumption. Finally, this would have a significant result on the environmental footprint of products consumed in the EU and contribute to EU climate neutrality by 2050. The product environmental footprint is methodology based on life cycle assessment and other methods which qualify the environmental impacts of products. It takes into account a full life cycle approach from the extraction of the raw materials through production and use and until final waste management. In food and beverage industry, this would be coherent with environmental footprint of production, packaging, making, distribution, and consumption of food or drinks. The industry is already making big steps towards the greater sustainability of their production, and I'm sure that the harmonized methodology, if prepared correctly, can help them reaching environmental targets even faster. This clearly is a massive and extremely complex issue. Therefore, I'm very glad that we have experts from all over the spectrum, from the European Commission, national agencies, industry and stakeholders, which will provide us with their views on this matter, which clearly leads the way to sustainable and more circular economy. Thank you for the attention. I'm happy to pass the floor to Ms. Emmanuel Mayer, Head of Unit of Circular Economy, Sustainable Production and Consumption in DG Environmental and European Commission. The floor is yours, Emmanuel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bogovic. Thank you very much for your invitation, and hello to everyone, to all participants. It's really my pleasure to be with you in that session on driving greener food and drink choices for the consumers. Maybe I will start by drawing the attention of the audience to the proposal which was made by the European Commission on the 30th of March, called Empowering Consumers in the Green Transition, where already the European Commission has now proposed to the European Parliament and to the Council an update of the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And among the measures which are proposed, one is directly related to green products, notably the generic green claims which are made. For example, my product is green, my product is excellent. So in that context, the Commission has been proposing to forbid generic vague claims which are not backed by evidence of high environmental performance. But what we are looking at in the context of the Green Claims Initiative is to go a step beyond the misleading, the unfair commercial practices, because we know that we need to protect the consumers, but it's also a question of fair competition between companies operating within the European internal market. As Mr. Bogovic said, the green credentials sell well. So of course, price is absolutely critical for consumers. But we see that the signs of greenness on products and organizations are really attracting the consumers, and companies are rightly so answering to these greater awareness of the citizens and consumers. But there can be really imbalances in the reliability of the claims which are being made. So if we want both to protect the consumers, but also protect fair competition, it's very important to make sure that the voluntary claims made by companies in reducing their impacts are real and solid. So what we are looking at is in this green claims proposal is to look at voluntary claims made by organizations. So it's not a proposal on the mandatory labeling or the mandatory provision of information by all. It really relates to the companies who are providing on a voluntary basis that information. And I think that also for the next steps of the debates, it's important to recall that. Then the proposal would address food and drinks, but not only. So it's also wider in scope, and I think it's important to keep in mind. So what is very important in our view is that, when we talk about the environmental impacts of products and organizations, we relate not only to CO2, not only to pesticides, not only to packaging, not only to transport, but that we have a global view of the environmental impacts. And we avoid, putting the spotlight on one positive aspect while the product has very negative impacts on another. And we look at this life cycle approach, as we say technically, so from the extraction of resources to the moment the product becomes a waste. So we have this life cycle approach in mind. And so in that context, many of you may know that we have indeed developed over the past more than 10 years now, the environmental footprint methods with the scientific community, with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And the methods precisely look at 16 environmental impact categories, and they always keep this life cycle approach in scope. We have, back in December, released the latest recommendation from the European Commission on how to implement, how to follow these environmental footprint methods. So they are available. But what I would also like to flag is that it's always, work in progress. So we learn from, more experience as we did in the past, thanks to the input from the industry, from the stakeholders who have been testing the methods. And surely we will continue to learn from both the experience and the scientific evidence and the policy needs. So they are not set in stone and they need to continue evolving. And I'll stop there because I think that we have many panelists happy to continue the discussions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mayer, and your intervention is among the ones we've all been very much looking forward to during today's event. So thank you for highlighting why specifically green claims matter, and also for kindly presenting the main elements of the European Commission proposal. Ms. Mayer, of course, is the head of the Circular Economy, Sustainable Products and Consumption Unit in DG Environment of the European Commission, where the core activity of her unit is to support the transition to a circular and green economy. And of course, joining us today, we have an excellent set of additional speakers, starting with Mr. Vincent Colomb, Ms. Camille Perrin, Gloria Gabellini, Dr. Betty Chang, and Mr. Jago Pearson, that I also wanted to invite to the scene as we progress into the panel discussion for today. And maybe just I will very quickly present our speakers for our audience today. So additionally, Mr. Vincent Colomb is the project manager at the French Agency for Ecological Transition. And as an environmental expert passionate about food systems, Mr. Colomb works with agriculture and food sectors to develop eco-design and environmental communication following a science-based approach. Ms. Camille Perrin is a senior food policy expert at BEUC, which stands for the European Consumer Organization, where she leads the food team. And in this role, she leads a variety of issues pertaining to EU nutrition initiatives, including European legislation on food labeling. Ms. Gloria Gabellini is Environmental Policy Director at PepsiCo, and she participates in this event in her role as co-chair of the Environmental Information Task Force of Food Drink Europe. Dr. Betty Chang is the research lead at the European Food Information Council, and having worked in academia in Australia, Belgium, and the UK, she has 16 years of experience in conducting research in psychology, specializing in behavior change. And last but not least, Mr. Jago Peterson is chairman of the board at Foundation Earth and chief strategy officer at Feinberg Artisan, in charge of the long-term strategic direction of the latter, but also leading its public affairs engagement, media relations, and business-to-business communication. So on this note, I would like to thank all speakers for joining us today for the panel discussion to follow. And perhaps starting with Mr. Colomb, I would like to ask you, from your point of view, what are the key areas of interest for your organization with reference to green claims, and what would you see as key challenges then ahead?
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I was not sure about the organization of the slide, but maybe I'd like just to give a few words about how we deal with this environmental communication in France. I think as we had a really interesting experiment in 2 years, quite a lot to share. So I just take 2 minutes to present you this, and then we can move on a broader discussion. So I tested, so it should work fine. Up. Yes, so just a few words to say why we've been working so actively in France on this environmental communication. I think, well, the Nutri-Score was started in France around 2014, and we have a lot of similar questions, basically. Well, we have the feedback that the Nutri-Score has been a quite positive public policy, and we think it's quite efficient to help towards better nutrition for the consumers. It's very well identified and understood by the French consumers now. And there is a clear demand to expand the information toward more environmental information. And so on the one side, we have the Nutri-Score that is well in place in the French market. And on the other side, we've been working since 2010s on the LCA database, that's AgriValise, on the LCA program, and we have a good knowledge about the LCA possibilities, also the methodological challenges to use LCA for eco-design in the companies and for public communication. So we have a strong public national database that is covering all the main food products in France, and that is very useful for environmental communication. And based on those two key elements, we started a national experiment, so from 2019 to 2021, where we had a lot of different proposals on how to make better environmental communication. So we had 18 schemes that were proposed, and also important research work, and with quite a lot of good learnings. And we also see in the market a lot of private initiatives that are popping up, and it's also for us a challenge to say whether the public bodies can harmonize, or will the private initiative lead the topic, basically. So in very short, what we get from our experiments is that well, we have a clear request in the national. We have a climate law that is asking for a large-scale environmental labeling before the 2025. So this is really a driving force for us. We want it large scale, so it needs to be low cost and available for everyone, so including the SMEs. And this is a very important point in the way we design the environmental communication. It needs to be useful as well for the consumers and the producers, and to be very clearly understandable for the consumers. And so basically, we really want, and we think we were able to design a science-based approach that will be mainly PEF-based, but we also identify that PEF, the current PEF as it is not perfectly enough. We really need to have some limited adjustments on some key topics for the food that are biodiversity, pesticide assessment, or we deal with the fish stocks. And these topics are key, and we cannot move forwards towards large-scale environmental communication if we don't include those adjustments. Those adjustments, they're also really needed if we want to better distinguish between agriculture systems. So we want to make sure to capture the benefits from organic farming, for extensive livestock, and this is a key topic for a broad sustainable food system. So that's really what we're working on now. We need to work with, of course, as much as possible with specific data. So we need accurate data to get accurate scoring. But for that, it can be quite expensive. And for SMEs, we also need to have the possibility to use semi-specific and more average data with using some databases such as AgriValise. Now, of course, it needs to be a perfectly transparent methodology and approved at the national level. So we have a roadmap that is ongoing with technical work this year, and we aim for operational scheme in 2023. And of course, we think now we need to take a bit of freedom from the PEF as it is, because it was not meant the PEF for large-scale labeling as we are intending, but in the midterm, long term, of course, we wish that we can all harmonize and converge towards the PEF. That's really our vision. So I'm not going to go longer on that, but well, just to share with you that we really have now built quite a strong experience on this topic. We think PEF is definitely useful, needed, but not enough today in light of our objective at least. That's really, it's time for large-scale, affordable, science-based eco-labeling scheme at a French and I think European level. And we really want to contribute to the discussion and bring our inputs as much as possible. That will be in short for me on the topic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colombe, for your very informative presentation, connecting the dots with regards to both the topic of our discussion, but also the vision and the key work of the French Agency for Ecological Transition. And on this note, I would like to turn to our next speaker, Ms. Camille Perrin, because I think it would be of great interest to hear from you as well. What are the main elements of key interest within the proposal for your organization on green claims, and what would you see as challenges then ahead?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon also from my side. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I can maybe first explain our key areas of interest and then also perhaps briefly how we think that a meaningful environmental label should look like. First, I think as some previous speakers have said, what we see is that many consumers are concerned about the environment and the climate crisis today. They strive to lead more sustainable lifestyles and to buy more environmentally friendly products. In the food area, a survey we conducted found that 2/3 of consumers are willing to change their eating habits for the environment, which is very encouraging. But the problem is that in trying to do so, our survey also found that a lack of clear labeling is one of the major barriers to sustainable eating. And at the same time, what we see is that on the market, there are a lot of unsubstantiated or even sometimes misleading green claims that are being used, such as carbon neutral, eco-friendly, etc. So it creates a lot of confusion for consumers, and it makes it more complicated for them to spot the truly green option in the shop. So we clearly welcome the EU taking action to clean up the market from unsubstantiated green claims, and also putting a bit of order in the way companies communicate on the green performance of the products. However, the question is now, how do we do that? I think there is generally some agreement on the end goal, but then there are some challenges in terms of methodology, but also some political choices beyond that. So I guess it's what we'll be discussing a bit more today. Now I'd like to present briefly how we think that a meaningful label should develop from the consumer viewpoint. And here we think that such labels should tick several boxes. First, regarding its development process, we think that to be trusted and seen as credible by consumers, such labels should be transparently developed and based on robust scientific evidence free from commercial interests. It's a very basic point, but for us, it's really a prerequisite. Second, regarding the format of such label, I think we have now some experience from the nutrition area, and there what we see is that labels with an interpretive element, such as color coding, are the ones that work best with consumers, especially lower income groups. And third, on how such label should be used, we think it's really important that such label allows comparing products within a category, so to really distinguish between different production systems and agricultural practices. And for instance, to give you an example, it's not useful for consumers, as we have seen with some existing labels, if all eggs score the same. For instance, if barn eggs, organic eggs, free range eggs all get the same environmental score. That does not bring any added value to consumers. So it's really important that an environmental label for food allows distinguishing between products within a category, but also across categories. For instance, it's important that consumers can compare protein sources from animal versus plant-based origin, say, for instance, a beef steak with pulses. This is very important. And I think that more broadly, we need to take perhaps a step back and ask ourselves what signal do we want to give to consumers, towards which products do we want to nudge them, because that's really the point eventually. And here we think that it's really crucial that any environmental food label and the methodology behind it drive changes in diets and food production methods, which are in line with the Farm to Fork strategy goals and targets. And here I'm thinking specifically of the targets of reducing the use of pesticides, fertilizers, antimicrobial, but also of increasing the share of organic farming, improving animal welfare, but also supporting the shift towards more plant-based diets. And this is where we and other civil society organizations have concern with the PEF method, which has been presented earlier. First, one of the concerns we have is that PEF does not allow comparing products across categories unless the developers of the category rules agree with that. But we would be surprised if the animal food sector would welcome comparison between meat and dairy on the one hand and plant-based foods on the other hand. But more fundamentally, the concern we have with PEF is that when applied to food, it tends to be mostly an indicator of yield, and therefore it tends to favor the most intensive method of production. And it's because PEF lacks robust indicators for several key environmental impacts, including land degradation, biodiversity losses, but also pesticide effects. And at the same time, it fails to capture some positive externalities of organic and extensive farming systems, such as biodiversity and soil health, for instance. So getting the methodology right is really crucial if you want to nudge consumers toward truly sustainable choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perrine. And indeed, reliable, comparable, and verifiable information plays a key role in enabling consumers to make more sustainable and green decisions, and also reduces the risk of greenwashing. So thank you very much for highlighting this within your intervention. I would also like to turn to Ms. Gabellini at this stage of the discussion to also ask you what are the key areas of interest for your organization as Environmental Policy Director at PepsiCo, but also joining us today wearing the Food Drink Europe hat as well. I think it would be of great interest to hear from you on key areas of interest, but also what would you see as challenges and also opportunities then ahead?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite. I'm wearing my Food Drink Europe hat today, so I will, try to tell you a little bit more about Food Drink Europe position and also wishes. First of all, there are really two main objectives that we see and that we would like to see coming out of this legislative framework. The first one is to really encourage and help food and drink company to provide transparency, transparent, trusted, and meaningful information to consumers on, to help them and support them making more sustainable choices in the food they choose. At the same time, we would like to actually that this policy framework encourages companies to do better, to improve their practices, both in the field when they actually contribute and directly contribute to growing food, when they supply food from farmers, when they buy ingredients from other companies, when they use transportation in their manufacturing plants, all along the supply chain. We can all do better and improve, and we would like to be able to then demonstrate and talk to consumers about this improvement. So we would like a policy framework and a methodology that allows us to do that. So it is a great opportunity, absolutely. And I'm also glad to hear, what I've heard so far. It's really in line, mostly, I would say, in line with the thinking that Food Drink Europe has been doing on this topic. It is a great opportunity, first of all, because we need to have a level playing field. We all want to play by the same rules. And we would also like to have a very robust method. So very much agree with Beuk that we want a methodology that is free of commercial interest. So we would really welcome these rules to be set by the Commission, by governments more generally. At the same time, we need to have the same rules applying across all countries, certainly across all countries of the EU, and now speaking for as PepsiCo for a moment, ideally even globally, because we all, at least we as PepsiCo, operate the global scale, and we see often challenges also from geography to geography. But certainly, for the moment, let's be happy if we have EU harmonized rules. Companies also will need some sort of support. And with support, mostly from a technical point of view. We heard many times this is really complex. These LCAs are very complex. Certainly for small and medium companies, even for a large company like PepsiCo, these are difficult exercises. I've been involved in it, not as a technical expert, but with giving my policy recommendations. It's complex, it's costly, it's hard to find the right experts even within the company. So it's been a journey that we've been doing in the last year. There is so much more to do, so we need support with tools, for example, to do calculation, but also with data. Data is a very, very important element in the way we provide information to consumer, and how we back then those information is something that I'd like to tell you a little bit more later. Since last summer we said PEF is the right basis for giving environmental information to consumer. Very much agree with what was said by by both Vincent and Camille, that we need some improvements in a way, and I'm very happy to have heard this openness from the Commission to listen to stakeholders on what we believe this improvement should be. Certainly, I think biodiversity is increasingly mentioned as one of those areas that needs a little bit of a better framing within PEF. There are other areas as well. Within carbon sequestration, for example, in soil is something that needs to be taken into account. Also on the packaging side, maybe how recycled content is taken into account, for example, or how different packaging, whether the actual impact of different types of packaging is well reflected. And lastly, I think verification and enforcement would be very important. I think we all, as food and drink companies, we all want very clear rules so that when we make a claim, we can be certain that claim is truthful. No one will, not only take us to court, but will question what we do. So really what is the enemy of making claims or providing information to consumer is gray areas where there is no certainty. So we really want clear rules that are verifiable and with a strong enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cabellini. And then turning to our next speaker, who is Dr. Betty Chang. Well, Dr. Chang has worked on plenty projects recently related to food labeling and also communicating research for science-based decision-making. So I was wondering, what are your views and thoughts on behalf of the European Food Information Council?
So the European Food Information Council, or EUFIC, is interested in how to best communicate information about sustainable food and drink to consumers. For example, in our recent consumer research, we examined under which circumstances sustainability labeling might be useful for this, and whether other types of information, such as more general dietary recommendations, might also be useful. So this touches upon, in a sense, the point that Camille brought up, in that a label should allow people to compare within product categories, but also between product categories. And it may be that complementary types of information might be more useful to help consumers compare between product categories, not just relying on a label as well. And the EUFIC is curious to know how the implementation of the Green Claims Initiative will affect consumer perceptions and decisions towards sustainable food. So this effect might occur directly, such as through how consumers interact with green claims supported by the PEF methodology, but it could also occur indirectly. For example, the financial and regulatory consequences of the initiative may skew the labeling landscape, leading to certain types of products or certain brands, which may not always be the most sustainable to carry such claims more than others. So this may influence consumers' perceptions of what is sustainable food and how easy or difficult it might be for them to eat sustainably. So a key challenge will be to strike a balance between scientific and regulatory rigor on the one hand, while supporting the accessibility of sustainable food for consumers on the other hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Chang, for your intervention. And then I would also like to, last but not least, turn to Mr. Yago Pearson on behalf of Foundation Earth and also address the same question to you. What are the key areas of interest for Foundation Earth, and what would you see as main challenges ahead then?
Thank you, Elias. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see a couple of familiar faces as well. Gloria, who sits on our industry advisory group at Foundation Earth, and also Betty, who's recently joined our independent scientific committee. We would very much welcome what the European Commission has said in the last few weeks. I think stepping in the way they have is exactly what's required. The reason that Foundation Earth was set up in the last year or two as a new international and independent non-profit organisation is to do two things, and it's to do the things that have been said, I think, quite frequently already on today's call. How can we give consumers the information they need to go and make an informed, educated choice in a more environmentally friendly way, which many of them do, but at the moment they find very, very difficult to trust information, claims, to believe in a credible, clear label. But more than that, how can we give land stewards, food producers, supermarkets, farmers, the information they need to go and innovate in a more sustainable way? And I think that's just as important. What are we all here to do? We're here to build a more sustainable planet. And the food and drink industry has a very, very important role to play in doing that. We can only do that if we persuade and encourage and facilitate innovation in the chain. And labelling is going to be a key part of that. So we're road testing two different methods at the moment. And our objective, the objective of our independent scientific committee that we've put together, is to come up with an optimum label, which we believe will be based upon PEF and building on PEF in the way that many of you have already said. And the key principles for that, in our view, are, well, three or four. Firstly, we need to have high quality data and as much primary data as possible. And linked to that, we need to be able to have two products of the same type to be compared to one another, to go back to encourage that innovation in the chain. And to the point that's already been made, no point if all eggs are a B, or all packet of sausages are a C, or all milk is an A. We need to be able to differentiate between those products and encourage producers and land stewards to innovate to make their products more environmentally friendly. We also need to ensure that while the future system is rigorously independent, absolutely based on the science, not in the pockets of any particular interest, industry group, lobby group, it does need to be built and to be taken into account everyone's views. And that's been a big principle of Foundation Earth's approach to date, and will continue to be as collaborative as possible. So we need to bring together the politics and the industry and the campaign groups and the science round the table to tackle these issues and to ensure that it's the future system is as independent and as robust as it can possibly be. And just finally, I think to do all of that, we also need a delivery vehicle. We need a technical solution if we're going to do this properly. If we're going to do it on basis of high quality data and as much primary data as possible, and to allow two products of the same type to be compared to one another, which we think is absolutely fundamental. At the moment, as Gloria already alluded to, a life cycle assessment is costly, it's time consuming, it's complex, and at the moment, quite simply, it's not scalable. So we're also stepping in that regard, and we're bringing together some of the leading players around the world to come up with a technical solution, probably more than one technical solution, to automate the entire process. To automate both the primary data gathering, but also the processing of the scores. So the optimum label in the future will not just be democratized and affordable, but it also be scalable. And if we can do that, we'll give the consumers the independent, clear information they need, information they can trust, one label, one method based on robust data. We'll also give the insights and the really deep dive information to land stewards so they can go and make the decisions within their businesses, which will have a very big impact if we were to build a more sustainable planet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson, for highlighting that and also for underlining the need for high quality data innovation, but also a science-based approach and overall the great potential of the European Commission of the upcoming proposal on green claims. And at this stage, I would also like to provide with another reminder for our audience to send us your questions via the Q&As box of the platform for the Q&A session that will shortly follow. Just prior to that, I would like to once again turn to Ms. Emmanuelle Mer from the European Commission and just ask you, well, during the consultation process on the Green Claims Initiative, you asked for stakeholders' opinion on options to provide environmental information to consumers, such as specific labeling formats. Do you then now plan to set rules only on the methodology to provide information to consumers, or also on the way to display this information, for instance, on the format of the labels?
Yes, thank you. Maybe, I mean, the impact assessment is still, undergoing further work. So there are also limits to what I can say. But I don't think I will be revealing a lot of secrets regarding, what is important in tackling voluntary claims made by companies on products and organizations. So one issue is how to substantiate, so what type of methods, and we have been discussing this together. Another one is how to communicate. And there, indeed, you could say, if a company is making a green claim, then you would need to follow an harmonized label. Or you give freedom to, the different companies in the way they want to display their claim, but with a number of minimum requirements. So I think there are, basically two broad options on how to communicate. Again, I'm really flagging that we're looking at voluntary claims by companies, and we are not looking at mandatory release of information from all companies in one label. So, this would come later on in the context of the sustainable food initiative and labeling at large. But now we are really looking at the voluntary claims made by companies. So I think it's very important to always keep this in mind. So communication, the way to communicate to consumers when claims are made is important. Then how do we verify the information? So this was also raised by Burke. Do we leave it to companies? Should some companies, audit companies, be involved in the process? What would be the role of enforcement authorities also in Europe on checking what has been claimed? And then the last building blocks, I would say it's really the data. And this also was highlighted by many participants in today's discussions. We need data from companies because it's related to the way they produce food and drinks. But we also need a number of very specialized data, which currently the European Commission is buying from specific providers and giving to the industry when it wants, on a voluntary basis, check its environmental impacts. Like the dairy industry, the wine industry, the beer industry, they have been, collectively looking at what are the hotspots, their hotspots, and they needed common data. So the availability of the data is central. The commonalities and the accessibility of the data is also very important. And this is important for companies, especially SMEs, to have the same access than other companies in that data. So there is a big need in making accessible the LCA methods, and that would be also something we would be very strongly in favor, obviously. So that we promote reliable claims, but we also facilitate the issuance of solid claims in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mayer, for highlighting this angle as well, inter alia, with regards to data, as I see that it has very much sparked the interest of our audience, as I see some questions coming in the Q&A's box on this particular element. And then, if I may, just as a follow-up question, just for the better understanding of our audience today, will the new rules or principles also apply to private initiatives that are already being used in different member states, such as the French EcoScore system? And in particular, will these initiatives be asked to use PEF as a basis for the provision of the information?
I think that what France has in mind, and it was clearly explained by Vincent Colomb, is really to move towards a mandatory labeling of food and drinks, and they have a pioneer role in what is being done. So they are more advanced than we are now, because we are not requiring mandatory labeling of food and drinks environmental information, which is something that France is really strongly pushing as a result of the French climate law. So they are a step ahead, if I could say so, and they are building, as it was said, on PEF. There are some differences, and so we are learning a lot from what is happening in France with different pilot schemes as well. And the question of biodiversity has been raised. So I think that France wants to highlight this, and we would also like the environmental footprint methods to also develop this aspect. Biodiversity is fully encompassed in the environmental footprint methods. We have 8 out of 16 indicators which have a very strong impact on biodiversity, but you don't have it as a separate indicator. So if you look at biodiversity, you won't see this. So this is why experts have been working over the past years and months to see how to develop that new indicator and to avoid double accounting. So I would say, we are all steering in the same direction, but there are differences in the timing of the different initiatives.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mer, for your reply. And referring to the case of France, I think makes an excellent bridge for Mr. Colomb to step in, as I wanted to ask Mr. Colomb specifically about the upcoming proposal on green claims, as it will serve to harmonize the way that brand owners provide environmental information. Then once the initiative is approved by the Council and the Parliament, what will the French government do to make sure that all current French initiatives will be aligned to the European rules?
Thank you for the question. I'm very in line with what Emmanuel just said about the common goal, but a bit of a different agenda maybe, and a timeline. And so that's where I think we might take some decision to go a bit faster on some adjustment on some indicators and so on. But at the end, I'm confident, and France is also actively contributing to the discussion to the PEF, and I'm confident we'll join together, but it might take some years. And regarding this fights, at the same time, we are very positive, and we fully acknowledge the need to better frame the green claims and so on. But at the same time, we are a bit we make attention that it should not go against our willingness to have this broad scheme system that is a bit more advanced, I think, somehow than only green claims. So that's where we need to find a good articulation between this green claim proposal and framework, and with this still leaving the possibility to develop some kind of large-scale eco-labeling scheme as we are working on, and which are, I think, the future after the green claims.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colomb. And then turning to Ms. Camille Perrin, I wanted to also follow up with a question and ask you, how do you think that environmental information on food and drink products should be provided to transform the market towards increased sustainability? And is information to consumers enough to do so?
Thank you. I've been presenting a bit in my previous intervention how we think that such labels should look like, but in terms of this information, the survey we carried out found that most consumers would like this information to be compulsory on food labels. 57% of consumers would like to see mandatory sustainability, or environmental sustainability information mandatory on food labels. And I found the previous exchange very interesting because we have always assumed that scoring type of schemes that evaluates the entire environmental performance of products would be considered as a claim, but now I take from the pre-discussion that this is something a bit different, but this is really an information customers would like to find. Now, regarding the second part of your question, of course, no, information and education is really not enough. In a way, it's a bit, it's both delusional and even a bit unfair to expect consumers to make greener choices just based on information, and especially when we know that the unsustainable choice is the one that is the most advertised, that is the most available, and that is also often the cheapest option. So I think it's now increasingly recognized that the most effective way to change food behaviors is to change what is called the food environment. And that encompasses all the factors that drive people's choices, including pricing, marketing and advertising, promotion, etc. So this is very important that we do not only focus on labeling and education. And finally, there is also, of course, a very important role for governments in updating national dietary guidelines. So these are the recommendations for healthy diets to ensure that they provide advice to consumers, not just on what is healthy, but also what is sustainable to eat. So it's really a broad range of actions and measures that have to be implemented to steer consumers towards more sustainable choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perrin, for your reply. And then, well, Ms. Cabellini, Food Drink Europe, just like your company, has been calling for harmonization regarding the provision of environmental information to consumers. So why is this so important for the food and drink industry?
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, today we are in a situation where there is no harmonization, and we have seen a multiplication of initiatives coming, both from private initiatives or from private players, also from some governments. And at the same time, we heard how consumers, are requiring this information, how important they are. And then we have the fact that food and drink companies are really committed to provide this information. So this is why we see, as I mentioned earlier, this great opportunity with this proposal coming out. I'm also, one of the points that we made as Food Drink Europe is that we wanted these rules to be voluntary, but then, from the time a food business operator decides to make a claim, they should follow mandatory rules. This seems to be the direction, so this is something that we would very much embrace and support. As I mentioned, there are a few elements that we would like to see improved in PEF and also simplified. So I just wanted to very briefly elaborate on that. I think the data point is very important, as we heard already. So there is a possibility to use primary data, as Foundation Earth, for example, is encouraging us to do. This is, relatively complex and costly. So again, we welcome all the efforts that Foundation Earth is doing to, at least as PepsiCo, is doing to automate this process. At the same time, secondary data will remain important for small, but also for big companies. And one of the issues we have identified is how to make these secondary data sets up to date. So secondary data sets are those that are the Commission, like Emmanuel mentioned, is buying from external providers. Why is it important to have this updated data? Because as I mentioned, food and drink companies want to improve their practices. They want to do better, both in the field, in their manufacturing operations. So we will be investing into, better ingredients, better agricultural practices, better energy, for example, greener energy. if the data that we use to then make environmental LCA, to make LCA calculations cannot take into account these improvements, then we won't be able to communicate about it to consumers and sort of, also yield some of what we have been doing and what we have been investing on. So from there, really the importance of having up to date. So I understand there is a bit of a tension between providing this data for free to also that all companies have access to it, at the same time making sure that they are updated frequently enough. So something very important. Food Drink Europe has been promoting for a while the provision of calculation tools to simplify all these operations, LC operations for companies of all sizes. I would like to mention that Food Drink Europe now has been working for a few months on a sort of a guide for food drink products. This is, a voluntary initiative that we have taken to support the members of Food Drink Europe, basically taking the PEF guide, the very big, large document, and try to, skim it down to the elements that are important to food and drink, because as we know, PEF actually is for everything, so that, an LCA practitioner that is working in a food and drink company or for a food and drink company would know exactly which rules it needs to follow. It's a sort of, we are trying to make some pre-decisions that can help LCA practitioners when doing a PEF study for a food or drink product. So that's something we've been working on, and whenever we are ready, should be soon. Maybe we will present it to the Commission, to the Parliament, and to the inter-stakeholders. And that's and I think, again, let me stress how important we believe it is to give information to consumers that are transparent and scientifically reliable. So the fact that the Commission is also thinking about, we heard these possibly two different approaches on how to actually show the information is also important to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cabellini, for your reply. And I would like to also turn to Dr. Betty Chang, because you just mentioned previously a recent study on behalf of UFIC. So I wanted to ask you, following the results of that, I think you also indicate that consumers with no specific knowledge on food sustainability would be less influenced by environmental information on food products against a more educated segment then. So what would you recommend to make sure that environmental information will have an impact on most consumer segments for a true transition to sustainable food systems?
So one of the most important barriers for people not using this information as much as they could is something that Camille has touched upon, and also one of the audience members asked about, which is the price of products. So consumers, research shows that consumers tend to pick the more sustainable option if it is not significantly more expensive. So unfortunately, in many cases, such as for plant-based meat alternatives, the more sustainable option is the more expensive one, largely due to market conditions. So this price barrier will be reduced when the production of such alternatives is scaled up, but this is going to take some time. In the meantime, the process could be accelerated if, with investments in research and development, or if larger manufacturers also invest in sustainable alternatives, or if there are subsidies for more sustainable alternatives or taxes on less sustainable ones. So related to this issue of price, another barrier is that sustainable alternatives tend to be less available and less diverse compared to the counterparts. So it's not easy for consumers to select more sustainable products. So of course, R&D, upscaling, production, and price reductions is going to help increase choice and accessibility. But food retailers and HoReCa also have a role to play in increasing the distribution of sustainable food. So when these outlets offer a wider variety of sustainable food, this will make it easier for people to choose the sustainable option, and it will encourage them to think that sustainable eating is an achievable norm that is encouraged across all actors along the food chain. So when retailers put sustainable choices, such as meat alternatives, alongside the less sustainable ones, it's going to make it easier also for people who would normally choose the less sustainable option to consider the more sustainable one. So at the moment, we don't tend to see supermarkets putting more and less comparable sustainable side by side. But if they did, it would make the effects of labeling more powerful, because then consumers can compare the labels of the products more easily side by side in the supermarket. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang, for making this point. And I would also like to turn to Mr. Pearson. And well, since the European Commission will propose its green claims proposal, I wanted to also ask you, what would you see as synergies of this initiative with the work that you're currently developing in Foundation Earth? And specifically, what areas do you think should be further developed by policy in the future to provide for meaningful environmental information for consumers?
So I suppose on three things I would regard as risks, because I think we've all come so far. I think we all subscribe to the philosophy here. We all know that this is going to happen and needs to happen. It would be a good thing for it to happen, but unless it's done properly, it risks maybe causing more problems than it solves. And I see those risks in three categories. Firstly, the debate between different hot topics, let's say meat versus plant, or locally sourced versus internationally sourced. I think if this is done well, it puts an end to those debates. It avoids the polarization. It's not for any of us, in my view at least, to play God and to tell consumers wherever they are and wherever they may be in the world that one thing is right and one thing is wrong. All we can do is, based on the science, ascertain the reality and communicate that reality very clearly and credibly to consumers, so they can make a choice, not just based on that factor, but of course based on other factors that they'll also find important. The second risk is proliferation, and I think that's why what the European Commission has said in recent weeks with regards pursuing a harmonised approach is so important. It's at the heart of what we're trying to do at Foundation Earth and why Foundation Earth was set up, because we see not just around Europe but around the world a number of very, very good initiatives that have advanced the agenda, that have done things better than others, that have brought something new to the table, that have given us really important information. I don't think any of them, and I would include Foundation Earth's current pilots in that space, are perfect right now. I think we can all learn from each other. The risk is proliferation and having multiple labels and multiple methods out on the market that would confuse consumers and confuse producers and not advance this agenda. So it's really important, and we're doing our utmost at Foundation Earth to go to our colleagues, whether it be ADEM, whether it be EcoScore, whether it be Planet, whether it be the work that IGD is doing in the UK, and saying, do you know what, we think we can do this better, and we think we can do it faster if we do it together, and we do it in harmony with policymakers. Thirdly, I think the third big risk is if this isn't done in a really credible way. And so if it is just secondary data or just proxy data, or doesn't allow two products of the same type to be compared to one another, it may give consumers information, but it won't facilitate the innovation we need to build a more sustainable food industry. It won't provide the carrot for the likes of Gloria at Pepsi to innovate in a more sustainable way so they can get a competitive advantage versus their competition if all fizzy drinks are a particular score. And so it's vital that we find a way to produce and facilitate a credible system that allows two products of the same type to be compared, that allows primary data to have a role, to allow even the secondary data to be as high quality and up to date as it possibly can. And we need to do that fast, we need to do it properly, and we need to do it in a democratized way, because this can't just be for big players. It can't just be for big supermarkets. It's got to be for the small brands, the small farmers. It's got to be for everyone in the chain, and it's got to be affordable and scalable. And that's what we're doing every day. And I think very humbly, we feel like we've made some very significant advances, but we've also got a long way to go. And with colleagues on this call and some of the other projects that I think have already been identified, by coming together, we can avoid that proliferation. And I think in time, we can come up with something that will make a very, very significant difference, give consumers the information they need, but most crucially, actually, build a more sustainable food and drink industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson, for making this point, and of course, we're all very much looking forward to that. And well, on this note, I would like to take the opportunity to thank all panelists for joining us today. And as we're coming to the end of the panel discussion, I just wanted to ask you, what are your key takeaways of today's panel discussion, and what would you like the audience then to take home today? And perhaps we can follow the sequence of the agenda, starting with Ms. Mer.
Thank you. I think it's very important to discuss green claims and voluntary labeling, mandatory labeling. Honestly, I did not expect this level of agreements, I think, between the panelists and around that. So personally, I'm very happy about it. At the same time, there are indeed challenges and there are risks which needs to be addressed. And again, data is quite crucial. There are great data providers who are able to release that data, but this is their business, and so they have some copyrights associated with that data. They are not often given the floor. So maybe one suggestion, Elias, for a possible discussion would be also to ask them to come to the conversation at some point, which I think would be very good. So I think substantiating green claims is really important, but I would like also to highlight what Berg has said on the importance of improving the food environment at large, because we are discussing one parameter, a very important one, but it's one parameter. And so for me, that's also the opportunity to recall the sustainable food initiative, which is also larger and in preparation. So tentatively scheduled for the end of 2023. There will be, before the summer, a public consultation which will be organized. So I think it's important for the audience to also look beyond green claims. And I wanted to take this opportunity to draw their attention to the public consultation that will come next. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mer, for kindly flagging. And perhaps we can move with Mr. Colomb, perhaps for some closing reflections then on the key takeaways of the discussion.
Thank you. I'm also very happy to hear that we really have kind of common vision about where we should head, and with yes, science-based, clear, specific data available for everyone, information to the consumers. They need to have some public framing. So this is, I think, really shared aspects. But if we go to the next step into a bit of the details, we also acknowledge that it will be hard to get everything, at least in the short term. So we will need to make some priorities, and that's probably where we're maybe not totally all in line. So where are the priorities? And I think that's where the discussions need to go on, and which is the agenda, which are the first steps that we want to achieve, and the following ones. But I think the common goal is shared, and there's obviously really an interest for cooperation, and we will work better if we work together than each one in his corridor. So that's what I'll take for today's very good discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kolob. And how about Beuk then and Ms. Perin?
Yeah, thank you. I think indeed we also share the view of the other panelists that there seemed to be some general level of agreement on the role and also the limits of environmental food labeling to nudge consumers towards greener choices. It's clear that it's an information that consumers want to have, and we see that more and more food companies and retailers are providing it, which is really great. Where the disagreement or maybe the challenge may lie is perhaps more on how to do it. And I agree with Vincent that perhaps there are some divergences in terms of the methodologies. There are different methodologies being developed and tested on the market. And I think we would really encourage perhaps the European Commission to establish an inclusive governance or process or other type of working group to really try and identify the method that is the most in line with the farm to fork strategy's objective when it comes to this environmental label for food that gives an overall score on the performance of products. And lastly, really, I will again come back to the issue of the food environment. It's very important to inform consumers on the environmental impact of the choices, but for behaviors to change in the long term, the sustainable food choice must become really the most available, attractive, and affordable one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perin. And I would like to turn to Ms. Cabellini as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also very glad to hear, this level of alignment. It's really encouraging. I think I noted 3 things that I think we will need to work further on, and also very much welcome, this inclusive environment can be replicated. It will be great. Certainly data, as has been mentioned already. I think verification will be very, very important to make sure both that consumers are confident of the information they received, and we as companies are also confident that we can, put information out there that, cannot be questioned in a way, of course, by following the procedure that is established. And I think linked to that probably is ownership. I mean, ownership of the methodology, of the label. I think that's also something that will be important especially for food business operators to know who wants the label and to whom eventually we will be responsible for reporting. Something that also would welcome to see clarified in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cabellini. And then Dr. Chang as well, perhaps some reflections and key takeaways from your side.
What I'm hearing from this discussion is agreement on how important it is to facilitate both consumers to make healthy choices and industry to move towards more sustainable practices. And we've talked about how labeling for consumers is just one of the many tools that can be used to facilitate sustainable choices. But I'm also curious to know, other than labeling for industry, what other types of tools could be used to encourage them to move towards sustainable choices. Because there's been some discussion on potential barriers in terms of data, in terms of resource investment for industry. But what are some solutions that could help make the process easier, less painful for them to reduce some of these barriers?
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang and Mr. Pearson as well. Last but not least, what are your key takeaways then? What would you like the audience to take home from the discussion today? Oh, I think you are muted.
Apologies, Elias. I'm really encouraged. I think if this was easy, it would probably have already been done. But I think this is the decade where it's going to be done. And we've had too many years of spin and misinformation and inaccurate greenwashing. I think there is a broad alignment on the general principles, and now it's a case of getting on with the delivery. The tricky political coalition building, the scientific debate, and probably most importantly, the delivery of the IT automation and data solutions that will enact the optimum system of the future. That's what Foundation Earth's been set up to do, with an independent scientific committee, an industry advisory group, so all voices are heard, but also to produce that delivery vehicle. And we would like to work with anyone on this call who is interested in collaborating and sharing intelligence, and of course looking to work with the European institutions. So in not before long, we will see one label, one method, consumers being given the opportunity to make a choice, and hopefully by then we would have made a pretty significant impact in reducing the environmental damage currently being done by the food and drink industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson, as well, for your key takeaways. And then moving into the Q&A session with the audience, I would like to thank very much all the participants who have submitted some questions in the Q&A's box. I hope time will allow to look into as many questions as possible. So I would just like to start with one first question for Ms. Mayer. As I would like to ask you, what policy option is coming out of the Green Claims Initiative? And if a company makes a claim, then should it be based on PEF?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I cannot see the questions and answers coming, so I'm reacting directly to your question, Ilias. So we have been looking, and we are still looking at different options in the context of the impact assessment. And unfortunately, as long as it is not completed, it's very difficult for me to say, no, this will be the rule, and we will follow it up, provided that the Council and the European Parliament agree. So it's still in the making.
And just as a follow-up question, the second part would read, what improvements are currently being considered by the European Commission in terms of comparability between product categories and also indicators?
If I understand, so I just would like to make sure that I understood the question really well. So one of the main advantage of the environmental footprint methods is that if for a specific product, for example, you decide to develop specific rules, then you have the ability for the entire sector to compare the performance of your pasta or your beer to an average. So this comparability dimension, I would say, is unique to the environmental footprint methods. Why? Because we have been maybe more detailed in what type of information needs to be looked at in specific rules. And so that ultimately the comparison is possible. And this is not necessarily possible with some other standards. So you can compare once you have defined your specific rules. So the question is then, what do you put in your specific rules? Do you compare meat and eggs? And that we so far did not have the experience of that. So there is always, a unit which must be referred to. So there are some choices to be made as to what we do. If you decide to compare sparkling wine with sparkling wine, then you give also an incentive to producers to do better. So it's very important to have this product-to-product comparison, not only to give the information to the consumer, but also to reward, the best performer, and to give that incentives to companies to always do better in the reduction of the environmental impact. But it's also still possible, to make some comparisons. So far we have been testing the environmental footprint methods based on the free will of the industries who have been engaging in this and defining which product. I still take advantage of the time to draw your attention to the fact that there is the consumption footprint indicator, which has also been developed by the Joint Research Center. And this is a more generic comparison of the environmental footprint of different types of products. So it's less detailed, but it can give also the big differences between different products. So that is also available to the public. I hope I covered it, Ilias. If not, tell me.
This is perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Mayer. And there is another question that touches upon the interventions of both Mr. Colomb and Mr. Pearson. And this reads, how compatible do you think the methods of EcoScore and Foundation Earth are?
I think the EcoScore, because there's private EcoScore that is a private initiative, and so I think it refers to the official environmental scheme that we are working on, I guess, and not this private initiative. So if I understand well, I don't know the Foundation Earth. I don't think the Foundation Earth already has a fully operational, and we don't either have a fully operational, but as I understand, we have the same rationale, that is to start from the path, but to look at the key adjustments that are needed and try to make some proposals on those key adjustments. So, but I cannot say much more on my side.
And Mr. Pearson, perhaps?
Vincent's correct. I think a similar philosophy. I think the EcoScore private initiative is slightly different, and I'm by no means a scientific expert, but as much as I understand it, is more based on secondary data with a bonus point system, which would allow for differentiation. Our approach is to go deeper than that and to get as high quality secondary data as possible and also as much primary data as possible. That being said, I think there's a lot to learn from all of these schemes, and there's probably 4 or 5 leading schemes. Nobody's done this perfectly. I think we can all learn from each other, and that's why I would go back to my point that I made earlier, that actually collaboration, avoiding proliferation, coming together to develop that optimum system is the way we think this should go, and that's what we're working every day to try and deliver.
Thank you very much for your replies. And then coming back to data, there is one question that reads, primary data is often related to confidentiality. So how could we best assure the robustness and quality of the provided primary data? And how can we ensure the sharing of data with regards to data confidentiality then? And I think this is an open question for reflection for all speakers, perhaps. So if there is any speaker that would like to take the floor, please feel free.
If I can, the words, I think this primary data is very variable depending on the company. Some company are very integrated production system where they control a lot of data, and then it can be as any accountability data. They use it, and they need, if there is a control, they need to prove it, and they will be able to do it quite well, and that's not an issue. But that's probably not the majority of the companies. For the majority of the companies, there is little transparency. They buy on the global market, so there is no way to connect the farm level to the final product today, at least. And this is extremely complex if we want to control primary data. And that's why, as in France, our view is to really try to provide with some operational short term. That's why we maybe focus a bit more on secondary data. I think that on the short term, that's what we can do today, is mainly work with secondary data, still giving the possibilities to the few companies that are able to work with primary data to do it. But then, of course, we hope the situation will change, but today that's how I see that.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Maybe, yes, if I may, just wanted to add in general that confidentiality is something that we need to pay a lot of attention for primary data, but also for any other type of data. That's why it's very important to us, PepsiCo, more generally food and drink industry, to have really clear rules on the methodology, but also on the ownership and on the relationship between, the users of the methodology, the owner of the methodology. We work with Foundation Earth. We are very, robust. We've worked a lot to put in place a really robust, agreement, and confidentiality agreement. Equally, if a government asks us to provide this data, we know, it will be a public institution. We can rely that institution, but it's really something that we need to keep in mind. So thanks for this question, which is touches upon an important element.
And if I may, Ms. Cabellini, there is also a follow-up question for you, and it reads, should mandatory rules in the Green Claims Initiative be applied not only to producers, but also to all actors using environmental information of products, such as retailers or phone applications?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, once this policy framework is in place, anyone will be making these products. I mean, we know that, for instance, retailers also have their own brands. We know that phone application, well, they don't have products, but they do use a methodology to score products. So, one of the most important elements for us is to have this level playing field, so everyone should use the same rules.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cabellini. And then If I may just reply to one of the questions received myself, there is a participant noting that it has been a very good and interesting discussion. So I think this is very much linked with the great interventions of all speakers. I would like to thank you all for this. And then the question is the session recorded and will it be shared with participants? So yes, indeed, on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, we will make sure to follow up with all participants with a recording of today's event, which will also be available at the website of the European Parliament Intergroup as well at the end of day today or early morning tomorrow. So thank you very much to all speakers on this note. It seems that there is a great common ground when it comes to the key role of data, the need for a science-based approach, but also clear rules on methodology. It's great to see the industry moving to sustainable practices. And of course, for consumers, there is a need for clear, reliable, comparable, and verifiable information. And overall, a need to take more green decisions. So thank you very much to all speakers for their key contribution to today's event. And on this note, I would like to put a dot there on my end, and I'll just leave the floor back to MEP Mr. Frank Bogovic, host of today's event, for his closing remarks as well.
Thanks, Ilias. Thanks to all panelists for this great debate. As we hear, there is a big challenge, these green claims, and all we agree with this, that consumers wants to have what you said, clear situation, that they know what it means, because there are too many these labeling schemes, and really, if there are no clear rules, as you said, if these things are not comparable, it's not easy for consumers to decide what to buy, what to use, what to consume. And for me, also one very important point was also these clear rules across Europe and also across the world. We see in many cases it's not easy to reach, but for sure we have today many countries these labeling schemes, and it's necessary to find a common ground. And what is also very interesting to hear is this, that improvement of this methodology, like including new categories like biodiversity and other things, I think it's very good. This necessary to underline. And what was for me also very interesting, somebody said voluntary eco-labeling and mandatory rules, and I think this is the possibility at the end of the day that also consumers can choose at the end. And for sure, we also heard about price and eco-labeling, other things. I can say that in Agri Committee, when we speak about, for example, organic farming, there is also very big debate how big can be difference between price between conventional production, organic production, that sometimes it's not so easy to convince consumer that this price can be higher. At the end of the day, we also in this situation, when we speak about food poverty, or how to ensure access to food to all people, it's really necessary to take in account. Thanks for a great event, and I'm sure as Ms. Emanuel said, there will be public consultation, and I'm sure that like we had a lively debate in Q&A session, it will be lively debate also in this public consultation. And I wish to all to you very good collaboration, and at the end of this process to have good product environment footprint methodology. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a nice afternoon, and thanks again for a very good